Yeah, this will be fun.
Around that, yeah.
Which is good.
Okay. And put that anyway.
Yeah, I got buckets. All right. This will be interesting how it looks, because every time my computer realizes he's talking to a projector, he makes things even smaller, and it's already very small, so probably things will be very squished. But yeah, it's about low vision. This is a filler talk. There's no Perl in here. There is code, but it's code that probably most of you hope you never have to touch. So we'll see. I'm going to talk about different things that people who have types of vision problems may be using to look at a website, and practical tips for people who have to build those. It's more browser-based, but some of the things would also hold for GUI stuff. When people are ever wondering about disabilities, they're always thinking about blind people. There's a very, very tiny number of blind people. There's a lot more of other things. So I'll quickly go through types of vision issues, because a lot of people assume you can either see or you're blind. And the most common one that's usually fixed with glasses, but not always, is stuff's just blurry. And sometimes instead of wearing glasses, what's better is just to make things bigger, because glasses may make things very, very tiny. And sharp and tiny is sometimes not better. Cataracts can lower the amount of contrast. So things are not, they may be blurry, they may not be blurry. It may just be that a dark red and a light red are very similar. My next slide moves, if you're pukey. You can have blood clots floating around in your eyeballs that are going to get in the way of what you're looking at, and as you move your eyes around, they move around with it. With glaucoma, you lose your peripheral vision. There's other things you lose peripheral vision. Or the other way around, if you've got macular degeneration, which a lot of us have a very more likely chance of getting, because it turns out the blue light from screens kills a certain cell in your eye that helps you get this younger than age 70. So we may all get this a lot earlier than we thought. And color blindness is everyone knows about it, but everyone forgets it. So I have to mention it. So there's things people can do. We might have something read some text to us, not a full screen reader, just just announce things. We can make the fonts bigger. We could magnify. We can lower the screen resolution. So don't ever tell yourselves nobody's using 600 by 800 anymore. That's not true. We may need higher or lower contrast, or a whole camera setup. So reading from the screen, there's different ones. There's stuff built into the Mac where you can just highlight some text and say, read this out loud to me. Some people zoom out. This is a slide from someone else's talk. And in their talk, they were pointing out that when we're reading at a decent speed, if we don't have something like dyslexia, we're really looking at the shape of the word, which is why capitalizing everything sucks. But if you rely on the shape of the word, then when you're zoomed in, you're unable to see the shape of the word, or maybe you can see the shape of one word, but if you want to read with any speed, you want to see the shape of several words. So some people may zoom out. We can, in our operating systems, set the text larger. It might help, but I had to use passcode on Windows, and my fonts are set to ginormous at the operating system level, which the fonts got bigger, but the line height was apparently hard-coded. There's usually built-in magnification, except in my operating system, Linux, there was one, and then whoever did it died or was hit by a bus, and it was never seen again. So changing the screen resolution is quite common. If I try to start up Dragon Naturally Speaking, I can't read any of that, and my fonts are huge. It stays small. But if I set down this 600 by 800, maybe I can read some of it. Same thing with the GIMP. The GIMP works even worse on Windows than it does on Linux. But I don't want to spend time learning something else, so I do use the GIMP. But again, if I want to read anything in the GIMP, I actually have to lower my screen resolution. You could set contrast settings. This is something Windows does the best. Nobody else is as good as Windows. Windows high contrast absolutely guarantees, as much as possible by a computer, that you're going to have at least a 7:1 contrast ratio. That thing on the Mac, that color swapping thing, that's not a guarantee of high contrast. That's swapping colors. Not the same thing. And of course, you can stick your nose to the screen. This is what most people actually do. Most vision degrades slowly. We're used to seeing. Nobody's going to go get a screen reader and spend a year learning to use a screen reader. They're going to put their faces closer to the screen. So there are various problems that we tend to have as low vision users when we are trying to use, again, I'm talking about websites, but this works for anything that's GUI. We may have to scroll horizontally to read if we're using magnification. We can't find where the hell we are. Maybe we're using a keyboard to find our place, or because we have some reason that we're not big mouse users. Websites love to make everything sticky because graphic designers, tooltips suck. The contrast is usually too low. And people like to use colors to give all sorts of information. Now, the horizontal scrolling for people using screen magnification is not anything that any developer could do anything about. Words don't wrap in screen magnification because all it is here's your screen, and we're taking a little credit card-sized view. That's our viewport that we see here, and we have to move the viewport around. And it sucks, and it makes you kind of sick, but it's even something I use. But you could avoid horizontal scrolling. If I want to read anybody saying anything on GitHub, I have to scroll from left to right and back again, which is horrible, and there's no excuse for a website to do that, except mine, because my screen resolution, it got squished. Again, Gmail, I actually can't use Gmail like this because there's so much sticky stuff that you have to scroll back and forth to read things, but I actually have to use the HTML version of Gmail just to get more screen real estate because some dork thought that having half the page sticky was a good idea. Don't do that. For people using CSS, you can prevent your website from having a scroll bar even if people are zoomed in. And for the CSS people, this is GitHub's code, but then tweaked, but it actually wouldn't work because you have to do this in 3 different places. One of the reasons this alone wouldn't work is because they also are using Flexbox in the header. Flexbox is the new hipness for the last couple of years. And I have an example of a website where I'm zoomed in to 400%, which according to the accessibility guidelines, I should be able to zoom in up to 400% if I have a 1280 wide browser. And I can't see everything. There's a magnifying glass and there's something else, and I can't see it. And that's because Flexbox, you can set things in rows and columns. They don't wrap by default. And so you need to check your stuff, and if things are not wrapping, you can force it to wrap. Unfortunately, most of the Flexbox problems I see is people have millions of nested divs, and each one of them is display flex, and that's not easy to fix, but getting lost is a problem. This happens when graphic designers want things to look clean. Clean means no information sent. Clean means guessing. Clean means sweeping around looking for stuff and randomly hovering over things to figure out if they are controls. White space is important, but too much white space is not beneficial. Hover only is something that sometimes a graphic designer or some kind of designer will think, I can stuff more information into a smaller space. The user will see some information, and if they hover over with the mouse, they'll see some different information. This is very common with things called cards. So this is a website that has an event. It's called an event apart, and every speaker is a card. And it has a picture of the speaker and talks, and then if you mouse over, it kind of changes. This one's not so bad because I can always read the text, but what some of these cards will do is there'll be text, but if you're hovering over it, you see maybe just a picture. The problem is, some of us can only ever hover. We can't not hover, because when this mouse moves away, so does the viewport. And that's something people don't keep in mind, that, yeah, I might have to hover. So your hover view needs to have what I need. Don't add extra stuff. So this site actually did it well. They just made it look a little different. Now, there's ways of getting around the maybe seeing things without being hovered or not getting lost. But this is kind of hard. You can have just a piece of what you're looking at magnified. So you can have, you can see your website to sort of orient where you are, and then a magnified section. You can have the magnified section move around with your mouse. Now, if you're just using magnification for reading, then I suppose it works. You can also dock. You can say some portion of my screen is magnified and the rest isn't, which is great if you've got multiple monitors. But if you're like me and you've got a little 12-inch thing, I never do this. But you can set your dock wherever you want, and that can be helpful. But it's not always useful. Autofocus is awful, evil, dangerous, stupid, except on pages where the user only does one thing. This was GitHub, where the user doesn't do one thing. GitHub made the assumption that everybody going to github.com does not have an account. So this was where it would bring you. They actually technically have this correctly labeled. For the blind people using screen readers, there is a label for this, but visually, they had a placeholder, and as soon as you were autofocused, the placeholder would vanish. And if I were to look around, the top one's called pick a username, but you can't see that when you're autofocused. The second one was called your email address. So the number of times that I thought I was logging in, when in fact it was trying to make a new account before oh yeah, shoot, that's what it's doing. That was not fun. The rule for autofocus is, besides don't do it, only use autofocus if the page does one thing. Like if it's blah blah blah.com/login and it's for logging in, great. Less keystrokes, it's nice. But if I can log in or create an account or do something else, don't do it. It's not good. When we zoom in, we often get a mobile view. Nowadays, the way people are doing CSS is they can use a responsive web design that as I'm zooming in, the browser says, oh, it's not different from being on a smaller device. So I had to do an audit of Gutenberg, the editor for WordPress. This is actually an old part of WordPress, but we also tested it. And they have an image gallery. You can upload pictures, and you can see them in your media library, and on the left and on the right, for people with good vision and decent monitors who are zoomed out, on the right there'll be some data about the image, and there are fields where you can set in an alt text, a description, you can change the name. But once you're zoomed in, that part is hidden, but it's not completely gone. So I could, if I'm a keyboard user, which I am, and I'm tabbing through the images, I start tabbing through things I can't see because they just sort of hid the whole form field behind. So the rule is, if I can't see it, get rid of it. Don't have anything sitting on the page that can receive keyboard focus if you can't see it, because people are going to, they're going to run into that and they're like, I don't know where I am, and they're tabbing. Local feedback is very important. So a person who's zoomed out, they're doing stuff on a page, and you, the developer, want to alert the user that shit has happened. So there may be a growler that comes up from the bottom, or there may be an alert that is somewhere at the top. In e-commerce, it's very common for the upper right to have a shopping cart. So there's a user wants to buy some stuff, which it's a little hard to see, but you can see that they got no euros, and they buy something, and now you can see, hey, it's updated. But when I am zoomed in, I don't see that upper area. It's not there. I won't see a growler. I won't see a pop-up message. This is a little form for a little thing. Now, of course, I can move my mouse around and kind of explore, which is what I'll do. But what I could do here is I say I want 3 of the thing, and I hit the order button, and a bunch of things happen. One, the order button becomes disabled, which tells me something worked. I can't hit it again. I'm not going to accidentally order 6 of the product. My keyboard focus also can't just vanish, and you can't be focused on a disabled button. So carefully, JavaScript puts focus on the nearest thing, and usually you want to go a little bit backwards. That's good. But most importantly, in the bottom it says, in your shopping cart. Like, yes, I have 3 different things telling me something worked. I'm not going to try to hit this button again. That is good. Local feedback, which means the designer has to work with this. The developer may say, this is what we have to tell the user. The designer is going to have to think of a couple different places to do this. So an opposite example of that is Trello. Don't do what Trello does. I typed in foo at bar instead of a proper email, and they put an error message way at the top, which I don't see. This is what I see. Keep the errors local. And it's also pretty standard. Most of the time, the error is close to it, but Trello people were going to be all creative and special. Don't do that. There's something new that's been going around. We'll let keyboard users see their focus, but mouse users whine and bitch, so we'll remove it for them. And there's even a tool that you can just grab off of GitHub called What Input, and it's listening for events. It listens for touch events, mouse events, and keyboard events. And on their own website, they have it implemented. So if I tab somewhere, I see I have, it's pretty terrible, but they do have a focus outline. When you're zoomed in, with screen magnification, sometimes you know that there's something, a control that you want to get to, and you'll never find it with the mouse, so you'll tab. So very often keyboard is used to find things. You know something is somewhere. Like if I want to upload a file and I get the little file menu, I'll tab until I can get to that file name because I know it's there. But after I tab, now I may want to explore with my mouse. But if I move with my mouse and suddenly the page realizes, oh, a mouse event happened and it removes it, I have now lost my landmark. And that's because it still uses a mouse move instead of a mouse down. I tell people don't try to remove the focus outline, but if you absolutely must, at least wait for people to click something, listen for a mouse down. But otherwise, I tell people, try not to do that. I know people like to bitch about focus outlines, but how about you make a nicer looking focus outline instead of taking it away? But my biggest bugaboo is sticky things, anything sticky. Sticky header, sticky footer, sticky sidebars, sticky bullshit social media icons that nobody even uses. They're awful. Don't do them. So in Gutenberg, which we were auditing, we have multiple stickies. Stacked stickies is even worse than stickies. So we've got the name of the thing we're editing is a sticky on top. That's the name. Then we have another sticky for, we've just opened up more options for a thing, and we can choose between, do we want block settings or document settings. So I have this very tiny little scrollable area to see, one thing at a time. Don't stack your stickies. Cookies are usually sticky, and yeah, this one actually, when I zoom in to this, and is this Trello? I think this is Trello. It's nicely mobile responsive in that it squishes, but I can't scroll up because I'm already up. It's absolutely positioned to the bottom, and as it grew off to the top of the page. If you go to LinkedIn, it's worse. They use position sticky, which you can't scroll back and forth with position sticky. This thing doesn't need to scroll back and forth because they made it responsive. But on LinkedIn, if I want to close the stacked alerts about we're using cookies, yeah, I know you're using cookies. I have to zoom way out, find that X, click it, and then zoom back in so I can see. Don't do that. People love to stick drop-down menus on sticky things. The end result is, as I try to scroll down the page, I'm trying to scroll down this menu because there's several options underneath the final menu, but it goes off of my viewport, and I can't scroll it because you can't scroll away from a sticky. That's evil and horrible and awful. Don't do that. Twitter has now got a quote-unquote mobile version with 5 million divs, and again, it's still not super great. They have a sticky header and a sticky tweet button, and so to read anything, you're still kind of scrolling up and down trying to see bits of it, which is awful. But the menu, at least, the menu's got a large scrollable area now. It's got a sticky thing, but the sticky thing's taking less than 1/4 of my screen, so that's okay. It's a little better. T-Mobile did this similar thing. They have about 40 menu options on a long drop-down menu attached to a sticky header, but if you zoom in enough, you'll hit their mobile version. But the mobile version also has a sticky with nothing in it, so you can still only see just a couple of options, although you can scroll them all, but it takes a little room. And then they put title attributes on all of their links that say exactly the same thing as the link text, so that you can have an even tinier version of the text you have sitting exactly on top of the text you're reading so that you can't read it because they're being so helpful. So don't use title attributes because they suck. They're never good. They're never good. Don't do it. So what I tell people who are doing CSS is, you may have a reason why. Maybe you have to have a sticky something. Your CEO says you have to have it or whatever. But you can measure if the viewport height isn't very good, because usually the mobile code is looking at width, and they're kind of assuming everybody's looking at their phone in a profile view, but a portrait view. But that's not necessarily the case. So you can measure in CSS, like, okay, how tall is the viewport? And if it's not tall enough, unsticky this stuff. Tooltips and popovers. There's a couple rules that you have to have with tooltips and popovers. One, if I hover over something and the new stuff appears, I need to be able to move my mouse over the new stuff that appears. But very often, I move over something, new stuff appears, I don't want to see it. Don't make me carefully back out to get off of it to make it go away so I can get back to where I was. So let me get rid of it without having to move my mouse pointer and stay on the screen until I choose to do something. And these are rules written in accessibility guidelines. Most people do it correctly with drop-down menus. I've never seen a drop-down menu that doesn't work the way everyone expects. You hover over your main menu item, the subs open, you can mouse over the subs, that works. But Jira is a good example of they have a little icon. You mouse over it, and it tells you something about email. I can't read what it says about email, because if I try to move my viewport back and forth with my mouse, which is how I move my viewport, it vanishes. So this is all I can see on Jira at a higher resolution. I don't tend to zoom in quite this much, but I need to be able to hover the actual message itself. But then you have the opposite problem of, oh, I triggered a pop-up, and now it's in my way, and it's really big on places like Twitter, where you breathe on something and suddenly there's a big pop-up in front of you. And normally, the only way to get rid of this is if my mouse is here, I got to kind of move off to the edge and make it go away, and then I need to move back to where I was. Suppose I could hit the escape key and make it go away, or suppose I could click on anything that's not a link and make it go away without having to move my mouse, something. And that's why I tell people don't use CSS solutions for this stuff. We have to start listening for things, which means for the most part we should be using JavaScript for pop-ups and stickies. Title attributes are controlled by the browser, so whether or not people can scroll them or not is not up to you. Whether or not it vanishes on its own is not up to you, so they are accepted from accessibility rules because it's the user agent and not the author. The author is the person who builds the web page. But this was on WordPress. They had a big ticket about it. Some guy said, well, I just want to put cutesy things to make it more friendly and inviting to the community, that if you mouse over the menu, you'll see stuff. And he couldn't understand why people were saying don't do it, because he says, well, but it's not important information. So I showed him this, and I said, I can't tell if it's important. Is it important? I don't know. I can see 3 words of it. And I can't move off to the right, because then I'm not hovering over it. So I said, either remove them or make it that I can click to see it, something. So they were removed. And title attributes, don't use them. Especially don't use them on containers. This whole container has a title attribute, which means everywhere my mouse goes, there's this dinky tooltip, and tooltips don't zoom in with browser zoom, and they don't zoom in with anything, so they're tiny, and they cover everything up, and they're worthless and stupid and evil, and don't do them, please. Windows high contrast. This is a bit of a special case, and a lot of people say, you know what, we shouldn't have to worry about Windows high contrast, but because it is so good at what it does, I would like things to work for Windows high contrast, because it can offer people that guaranteed, 7:1 contrast ratio. But people like to style form controls because they think everything that operating systems come up with is hideous. And so a long time ago, one of the Twitter guys made a bunch of styles for form controls, and they're mostly accessible. Like here's a select, and it doesn't look like an operating system select. He's using a real select. It's correctly coded, looks nice. But in Windows high contrast, I can't tell what it is. I don't know what I'm clicking. I don't know what it does. It's kind of worthless, but there are ways to fix it. For one thing, in Windows high contrast, all borders are visible, even transparent ones. So if I want to see the shape of the thing, give it a transparent border. And same thing with focus. This thing had a box shadow that kind of glows when you focus on it with the keyboard, but you'll never see a glow in the Windows high contrast unless they change it, which they're discussing. But the reason they normally remove glows is because gradients and fadey things may be reducing contrast. But if we can do this, which is a little better, I can kind of see where I can click. I get an idea of, okay, this is a big thing. I don't know if it's a button, but I can tell that I'm focused on it, and I can see what it is, and no other users are going to see anything different than what I first showed. So it's a solution that you don't have to worry about it later making things ugly. But we got this box here, and the reason it's a box is because this is a CSS trick that a lot of us used to use for years and years and years. You can make arrows with CSS by making 2 borders have like 0 width and 0 height, and then the other 2 have the color, and it makes a little arrow, which is cute, but I said all borders were visible in Windows high contrast, so you always see a square or a bar or something. So I do recommend SVGs. Font icons are visible in Windows high contrast, but font icons have their own problems. I don't like them. But SVGs are so far the winner as far as accessibility in all sorts of combinations. But SVGs often come with their own fill. Maybe you take it from the graphic designer and they manually put in a fill color or a stroke color. And the problem is if this page was white and it had dark blue, out of time. Hey, I'm out of time. I'm going to stop right now then. But I'm going to say that you can fix your SVGs and make them always fit. I'm going to